I was 11 when my mother kissed my forehead at the airport, smiled for photos, and left me with $2 crumpled on the kitchen counter like I was a forgotten receipt. The house smelled of bleach and silence as the door closed behind them. Europe for a month, freedom for them, hunger for me. I remember counting coins under a flickering light, my stomach folding in on itself, realizing I had been officially abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect me. That night, something cold and permanent settled into my chest. Before I tell you how that feeling turned into a plan, tell me where you're listening from, because if you've ever been left behind, this story is for you. The door clicked shut behind her with the soft finality of a sentence I didn't know was life. I stood there, 11 years old, holding a plastic grocery bag with $2 inside and a note that said, "Back in a month. Be good." I remember the handwriting more than the words. Round, practiced loops, like the way she signed school forms for my older brother with pride, and mine with speed. The sound of the lock turning echoed louder than anything. Silence thickened around me like smoke. I waited for footsteps to return, some sign she forgot something. But all I got was stillness, and the scent of her perfume trailing through the hall like it missed her already. I wandered through the kitchen like a stranger in my own home. The fridge was nearly empty, half a bottle of expired orange juice, a heel of bread, mustard, and some American cheese slices that were more plastic than food. The cupboards were worse. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stared at that pathetic $2 on the counter and thought, this is all I'm worth to her. That's what betrayal looks like when it isn't loud. It's quiet and calculated. A kind of humiliation so deep, it teaches your bones not to expect anything warm again. The first night I didn't sleep. I sat curled up on the living room floor, wrapped in a thin throw blanket, the TV static flickering across my face like it was trying to say something the grown-ups never would. Hunger crept in around midnight, sharp and mocking. I pressed my fists to my stomach and whispered stories to myself, fairy tales where someone always came back for the child. But morning came and no one had. The fairy tales lied. By the third day, the house started to smell. Not of trash, of absence. No shampoo, no cooked food, no laughter or footsteps. Just the ticking of the wall clock, like a slow countdown. I counted every coin I found, beneath couch cushions, behind drawers. It totaled $4.87, including the $2 she left me. I walked to the corner store in oversized flip-flops, clutching coins like treasure, and bought white bread and peanut butter. The cashier looked at me too long. I told him my mom was just parking the car. He smiled, but I think he knew. I started making rules for myself, like I was both the prisoner and the warden. Eat twice a day. Don't answer the door. Don't talk to neighbors unless you have to. Don't cry unless it's dark. I broke the last one often. Sometimes I would press my ear to the wall in the hallway, listening to the silence on the other side of the house like maybe it would give me a reason. But it never did. The lights began flickering by the second week. The electric company had probably sent notices I hadn't seen. I didn't know how to pay a bill. I barely knew how to be a kid anymore. One evening, I got desperate enough to knock on the Sanchez's door. They were the kind of neighbors who waved at you in the driveway but never came over. Mrs. Sanchez opened the door with her robe half-tied and eyes tired from work. I stammered out some lie about our power being weird and asked if I could charge my school tablet. She invited me in. Warmth hit me like a drug. Their house smelled like onions and detergent. Her daughter offered me juice and cookies. I said no. My pride choked me. I left 20 minutes later, tablet fully charged, shame pulsing in my chest like heat from a burn. I kept a journal in the back of my school notebook, writing things I couldn't say out loud. Not full sentences, just phrases. I'm not a real kid. They forgot me. Don't trust love. And one entry, written in bold capital letters, I will remember this. That was the first time it occurred to me that revenge doesn't have to be violent. It just has to be patient. And quiet. Like what they did to me. Sometimes I would look at the framed family photos on the wall and wonder who took those pictures. smiling parents. Vacations I was too young to remember. My older brother holding a trophy, our mom beaming. I was there too, in the corners. Always slightly out of frame, or staring just past the camera. I think I've always known they didn't see me. On the 20th day, I found the drawer. Bottom of the hallway cabinet. It was locked, with a brass handle that had gone green with age. Something about it felt sacred and forbidden, like it held answers or secrets or maybe both. I stared at it for 10 minutes, my heartbeat syncing with the hum of the fridge. I tried to pry it with a butter knife, but it wouldn't budge. There was a key somewhere, I just didn't know where yet. And they had said, so casually one morning, don't go snooping in the hallway drawers. I remembered that line now. I remembered it like a challenge. That same night, I ran out of bread. The peanut butter was gone too. I sat on the porch and listened to the wind. The sky above was full of stars that didn't give a damn if I lived or starved. I wrapped myself tighter in my blanket and tried to remember the last time my mother had said she loved me. Not texted. Said. I couldn't. I could remember her laughing while booking flights. I could remember the click of her heels as she walked out the door. I could remember her smiling in selfies from Spain. But love? No. Not really. The next morning, the power shut off. Just like that. 1 second I was brushing my teeth in the half-light of dawn, and the next, everything clicked off. I stood frozen, toothbrush in hand, as the silence deepened. No fridge hum. No warm water. No escape. That was when the fear shifted into something else, resolve. I would never let them do this to me again. I would survive this. I would remember everything. I would open that drawer. I would find out what they were hiding. And one day, I would make them feel exactly how I felt standing there, toothbrush still in my mouth, in the dead silence of a powerless house that had never felt like home. By the end of the first week, I had stopped expecting anyone to come back. The door hadn't creaked open, no neighbor had asked questions, and not a single adult seemed to notice that a child was slowly erasing herself in plain sight. I learned to move like I didn't exist, quiet, calculated, invisible. That's what survival looked like in a house built by a toxic family legacy, silence mistaken for obedience, neglect disguised as independence. I started cataloging where everything was. The top right cupboard still had a box of stale cereal. The drawer under the stove held rice and 2 bouillon cubes. A can of corn in the back of the pantry became my emergency stash, sacred. I rationed everything. Hunger taught me to do math with teaspoons. I drank tap water like it was wine. When I chewed, I counted seconds before swallowing. Food was no longer nourishment, it was a system. A puzzle I had to solve every single day or risk breaking down. That kind of betrayal rewires your brain. It rewired mine. At school, I became the girl who always said she ate before class. Who always had an excuse for why she didn't bring lunch. I'm doing intermittent fasting, I told a teacher once. She blinked, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. My stomach growled during math tests, and I pretended it was my chair squeaking. No one really looked. No one really wanted to. It's frightening how well emotional abuse hides in plain view, especially when it's dressed as middle-class normal. That's the thing about family drama in pretty houses. The walls are thick. The lies even thicker. I forged my mother's signature on a field trip form. My hands trembled, but I got it right. Loops just like hers. The office didn't question it. When they called home for permission slips, I used our ancient answering machine to intercept messages and delete them. I could imitate her voice by then, just enough to say, "Sure, that's fine," and hang up before they asked too much. That's how far I'd gone. 11 years old and already in deep with performance, already fluent in deception as defense. Sometimes, when the hunger gnawed too loud, I'd walk to the grocery store with $1 and try to make eye contact with a cashier who looked kind. If I was lucky, they'd round the price down. Other times, I'd pretend to be browsing and snatch a granola bar when no one was looking. I hated myself for it. But when you're a child abandoned in your own home, morality is a luxury. I stole because I had no choice. I smiled while doing it because I'd learned that a soft voice and polite thank you made you invisible. At night, I'd sit by the window with the lights off, listening to my neighbors' laughter drift through open windows. Other families clinking dinner plates. Dogs barking. Music playing. Meanwhile, I was fading. My bones felt lighter each day, like I was disappearing cell by cell. That was the moment I realized, neglect doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers. And if no one listens, it becomes part of the air. The phone rang one afternoon while I was boiling water for the last of the rice. I let it go to voicemail, then played it back from the ancient machine. My mother's voice echoed through the living room, chipper and detached. Barcelona is so beautiful this time of year. We had sangria and paella. Your brother finally tried squid. I'll send pictures later. Hope things are fine back home. Love you. She hung up without asking how I was. Not a single word about food, power, or school. I stood there, spoon in hand, staring at the wall. Fine. Hope things are fine. The way abusers minimize their absence should be studied. She could be across the ocean and still find a way to make it about her adventure, not my survival. I sat down and wrote her another entry in the journal I had now titled Evidence. This one read, she called. Didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't mention food. Said the squid was good. Then I drew a box under it and labeled it, memory worth remembering for later. It felt like collecting data on someone who'd wronged me. Like building a quiet revenge plan brick by brick, every moment a part of the eventual reckoning. More voicemails came over the next few days. Always about Europe. Always cheerful. One even said, don't forget to feed the cat. We didn't have a cat. That part gutted me. Either it was a joke I wasn't in on, or she forgot what house she was calling. I didn't know which was worse, intentional cruelty or casual indifference. Maybe both were the same. I started taking cold showers because the water heater gave up around the 12th day. I screamed the first time the freezing water hit my back. Not from pain, but because something in me cracked. Like a dam bursting in silence. I bit my hand to muffle it, sat under the shower, knees to chest, and waited for it to stop hurting. It didn't. But I told myself it did. That was the trick, lie to survive, then believe it hard enough that you forget you're lying. Then came the night I found the drawer again. The locked one. I'd almost forgotten it in the routine of survival. But something tugged at me. I walked over barefoot, stepped around the hallway shadows like they could hear me. I knelt in front of it, staring at the old brass handle. Still locked. Still quiet. I pressed my ear to the wood like it could speak. I didn't know what I expected. But I felt something shift inside me. Not a ghost. Not a voice. Just intuition. That cold clarity that comes when you've had enough and realize you're not afraid anymore. I whispered, you don't get to hide forever, and stood up. A few days later, I came across a pile of unopened mail in the garage basket. Most were catalogs and credit card offers. But tucked between them was a red envelope with urgent final notice printed in bold. I pulled it out with shaking fingers and read, electric utility service disconnection scheduled. My throat closed. The bill was 3 months past due. I flipped through the pile, there were more. Gas. Water. Trash. All unpaid. All ignored. That's when it hit me. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't just forgetfulness. This was a pattern. A system. They knew they'd be gone. They planned their vacation. And they had deliberately not paid for the basics I needed to survive. It wasn't just abandonment, it was strategy. Financial manipulation dressed in sun hats and passports. I stared at the dates, doing the math. They hadn't paid utilities in months, yet they'd booked luxury hotels in Europe and posted champagne selfies on Facebook. And I, 11 and starving, was the collateral damage. No, not even that. I wasn't collateral. I was nothing. An afterthought in a house that had made me invisible, turned me into a ghost before I ever had a chance to be a child. I stood in that dim garage, bill in hand, and made another silent promise: this is going in the file. One day, you're going to answer for this. And when you do, I won't raise my voice. I won't scream. I'll show them exactly what they taught me, how to be cruel with a smile. Then the garage light blinked once and went dark. They returned on a Sunday, tanned and loud, dragging rolling suitcases across the gravel like the sound alone could erase a month of silence. I watched them from the living room window, my mother in designer sunglasses, my stepfather laughing at something she whispered, both of them glowing with wine-fed happiness and sunburnt skin. My brother, smug and oblivious, swung his duffel bag over his shoulder like a prince returning from conquest. I didn't move from the couch. I just watched. And waited. The front door flew open. My mother stood in the frame, arms wide like this was a sitcom reunion. "Honey, we're home," she called, like she hadn't vanished for 4 weeks and left me to rot. I stayed silent. That smile, too bright, too staged, flickered when she saw my face. I must have looked like a ghost, skin pale, lips chapped, hair matted from neglect. But she didn't ask. Instead, she said, "Oh, don't be so dramatic. You survived, didn't you?" That line cut deeper than hunger ever had. Later, she stood in the kitchen, tossing bags of European snacks onto the counter, commenting on how dusty everything had gotten. I pointed out the unpaid utility bills, the mold in the fridge, the cold showers. Her response? "You're exaggerating. I'm sure it wasn't that bad." She waved it off like a gnat. My stepfather chuckled and said something about kids being soft these days. I felt rage crackle beneath my ribs. But I swallowed it. I had learned something in their absence: anger makes you sloppy. Silence, however, sharpens you. At dinner, take-out pizza, because no one wanted to cook, my mother leaned over and said, "I hope you didn't make a mess. We worked really hard for this trip." She said it like I owed her peace of mind for her vacation. Like I should apologize for needing food and heat and basic decency. I nodded, my mouth a perfect line. My brother mentioned they'd stayed in a villa with a private chef. I looked down at my crust. I'd been licking peanut butter off spoons. The contrast didn't hurt, it clarified. Later that night, I heard them laughing in their bedroom. I stood outside the door, the hallway dimly lit by a nightlight shaped like a seashell. Their voices were low but not careful enough. "Did the payment go through?" my stepfather asked. "It better have. God knows I forged enough signatures for that policy," she replied. I froze. "I mean, she's old enough to be on her own for a few days. It builds character." "A month isn't a few days," he muttered. "She'll be fine. She's always fine. She's the quiet one. The quiet one. The forgettable one. The one you can leave behind like a coat you don't need this season." That's how she saw me. I backed away from the door, heart thudding. My name hadn't come up yet. But something about the way she said policy made my skin crawl. It wasn't about money for groceries. It was something colder. Bigger. The next morning, she handed me a souvenir shirt 2 sizes too big and said, "See? We didn't forget you." I didn't reply. I just folded it neatly and placed it on the shelf in my closet, right next to my old baby blanket, symbols of what people pretend to give when they've already taken everything. School started back the next day, and with it, a new mask. I smiled more. I laughed at things that weren't funny. My teachers noted how refreshed I seemed after break. I wanted to scream. But instead, I played the part of the grateful daughter who was so glad her family was back. I had learned not to give them a reason to look deeper. That's how you survive a narcissistic family: you become what they want to see. Then, once their backs are turned, you start digging. The first thing I did was check the hallway drawer again. Still locked. Still taunting me. I studied the way my stepfather glanced at it as he passed by. He always looked, just a second too long. That's when I knew, whatever they were hiding, it lived in there. At dinner one night, I asked casually, "What's an insurance policy?" My mother choked on her wine. My stepfather looked at her, then at me. "Why are you asking?" I shrugged. "We had a class thing about it. Just curious." She laughed, but it sounded like glass cracking. "Oh, sweetie, that's boring adult stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." I smiled. I didn't blink. After they went to bed, I crept into their office. I'd learned the art of walking without sound, like prey in a predator's house. I opened drawers, leafed through bills and receipts, most of them meaningless. But one stuck out. A manila envelope with my name on the corner. Inside was a folder labeled, "Policy Beneficiary, Redacted." The rest was medical jargon and fine print. I didn't understand all of it, but I saw the date. 3 months ago. The same week they booked Europe. I stared at the envelope, my name typed neatly above the words "insurance payout," and felt my stomach twist. I was the target. Not loved. Not protected. Just insured. I put everything back. Carefully. Precisely. Then I stood in the hallway, the house silent around me, and listened for movement. And that's when I heard it, my name, again. Through the vent that led from their room to the laundry corridor. If anything had happened to her, my mother whispered, we'd be set. "You said it wasn't risky," he replied. It wasn't. I knew she'd be fine. She always is. But what if she wasn't? Then at least it wouldn't have been for nothing. Those words slid under my skin like knives. I leaned against the wall and let them cut. I needed to feel every inch of it. The betrayal. The manipulation. The cold, calculated willingness to risk my life, for what? For a vacation and a check? They didn't see me. Not truly. But I was watching them now. I wasn't the silent one anymore. I was the quiet architect of something they wouldn't recognize until it was too late. And in that moment, I realized something else: revenge doesn't begin when you're angry. It begins when you finally understand who you are to them. And decide to become something else entirely. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my room, back against the wall, writing everything down. Word for word. A record. A witness. The first page of something I knew I wouldn't finish until the day I made them pay for what they almost got away with. And then, right before dawn, I heard my mother's voice from the hallway. Not to me. To him. She can't know. Not about the policy. Not yet. The drawer gave in at 3:12 a.m. A soft metallic click, nothing theatrical, but in the quiet of the house it echoed like gunfire. I'd found the key inside an old coat in the hall closet, tucked deep in the lining like someone had wanted it lost. They hadn't counted on how obsessed I'd become, how every night I walked past that drawer like a warning, how I whispered promises to it in the dark. Tonight, I whispered nothing. I just opened it. Inside, neatly stacked files, labeled folders, receipts with corner staples, envelopes sealed and yellowing with time. Not the chaos I'd expected. This was organized. Intentional. That's what made it worse. I sat cross-legged on the floor, a flashlight balanced between my neck and shoulder, and began reading the proof of everything I already suspected, but hadn't been ready to see. The first folder was labeled Trust, Matthew D. My brother. Inside, statements, contributions, bank account logs, even interest growth projections. My chest tightened. He had a trust fund. Fully funded since he was 7. Automatic monthly deposits. Disbursement plan available upon maturity. Maturity, such a cruel word when you've been feeding yourself rice and tap water while your siblings' wealth accumulates silently behind a locked drawer. I kept reading, each paper a small slap. Gifts from relatives in care of mother, all funneled into that account. None of them had ever been told about me. I flipped to the next folder. Policy Linda A/Guardian Protection. My mother's. Life insurance. Premiums paid 6 months in advance. A second page outlined a supplemental travel policy taken out 2 weeks before their flight to Europe. Beneficiary, Matthew. Secondary, husband. I wasn't even listed. Then I found a thick envelope marked Asset Holdings. My hands trembled. Inside were property papers for a condo I never knew we owned, documents for a car I'd never seen, and a side account with an unfamiliar bank name. All in her name. Some jointly with my stepfather. None with mine. It felt like peeling back skin to find nothing underneath, just hollowness where connection should have been. Family secrets. Hidden wealth. Generational trauma disguised as we're just getting by. But then I saw it. A folder tucked in the very back, sloppier than the rest. No label on the tab. I opened it and stopped breathing. Application for Educational Grant, Jane A. My name. The form was signed in heavy black ink, my signature at the bottom. Except I hadn't written it. I had never seen this document before in my life. And yet, there it was. My forged name. Attached to a grant I never received. A payout approved 6 months ago. $12,000 transferred to an account I didn't own. I sat perfectly still. My ears rang with a high-pitched pressure, like my brain couldn't decide between rage and fear. They had forged my signature. Used my name. Stolen money meant for my future. I held the document up to the light, tracing the fake loops of the J, the rushed tail of the A. They hadn't even bothered to get it right. Just enough to pass a casual inspection. Just enough to keep the lie rolling. And suddenly I knew, this wasn't carelessness. This was calculated. This was betrayal in its most elegant form. Not the loud kind, not the kind that leaves bruises. The quiet kind that rewrites your identity on official paper and files it away while you're too young to understand. I put everything back exactly where I found it. Fingerprints only on the edges. Folders in order. The lock turned silently when I closed it, and I slid the key back into the coat lining. But inside me, nothing returned to its place. Something had been broken open that couldn't be closed again. They had lied about love, about protection, about who mattered and who didn't. And now I had proof. Not just memories or feelings, but evidence. At breakfast, my mother was all smiles again. She asked how I slept, poured me orange juice like we were normal. I watched her hands. I watched the ring on her finger glint in the morning light, paid for by accounts I wasn't allowed to know existed. "Did you unpack everything?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. It's amazing how much you can learn from what people keep hidden." She looked up, fork pausing midair. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged and sipped the juice. "Just saying. Closets, drawers, emails, you know." Her eyes narrowed, but only for a second. Then she smiled again. "Well, some things are for adults." I smiled back. "I'm learning fast." That night, I started a new file. Not a paper one. A digital one, hidden deep in a school folder labeled Algebra Review. Inside it, I began documenting every date, every document I remembered, every dollar I could trace. I gave it a title, For Later. The shift was complete. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was watching, collecting, archiving. Preparing. That's what revenge looks like when it's born in silence. It doesn't scream. It calculates. I began listening more carefully through the vents. Picking up on small arguments about overdrafts, bounced fees, missing correspondence. I tracked the names of banks they mentioned. I Googled financial terms in the school library when no one was watching. I copied down policy numbers and researched them after class. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how much they'd taken from me before I even had a chance to own anything. But the forged signature, that was the linchpin. The thing I knew could unravel them completely one day. A document is never just a document. It's a weapon when held by the right hand. And I intended to become that hand. And then, just as I was closing my laptop, my brother knocked on my bedroom door. He never knocked. "You know they're hiding stuff from me too, right?" he said, voice low. I froze. "What do you mean?" He looked at the floor. I saw my name on something weird. A withdrawal from the trust. One I never asked for. I stared at him, heat rising behind my eyes. "When?" "Couple months ago." I asked Mom. She said I was imagining it. A pause stretched between us, thick with shared damage. "Do you have proof?" I asked. He shook his head. "Do you?" I said nothing. Just opened my laptop again, and turned the screen toward him. His eyes widened. For a second, just a second, we weren't enemies. We were casualties. And maybe, eventually, co-conspirators. But before I could ask more, we heard footsteps in the hallway. He bolted. I shut the laptop and turned off the light. The door creaked open. My mother's silhouette appeared. "You two weren't whispering about anything serious, were you?" I smiled into the dark. "Just algebra." She lingered too long in the doorway. Then she left. And I reached under my pillow, pulled out the forged document again. And began circling every lie with a red pen. They still thought I was stupid. That was their first mistake. They came home and assumed the silence meant defeat, that my eyes weren't watching their every move, that I'd slipped back into my role as the forgotten daughter, the quiet one, the harmless one. But quiet isn't harmless. Quiet is when the roots grow deep. When the planning begins. And I was planning. Every night after they went to bed, I opened my laptop and slipped into the language of strategy. Legal blogs, financial forums, estate law videos hidden under innocuous thumbnails. I didn't know what a revocable trust was at first. Or a fiduciary duty. But I learned. I learned fast. I read about financial abuse, inheritance manipulation, insurance fraud. I read about signatures and how to prove forgery. The world of betrayal had rules, and if I wanted to win, I had to master them. I memorized key phrases: constructive fraud, breach of duty, wrongful deprivation. Words that felt like armor. Concepts that reshaped the chaos into something I could control. I learned that signing a minor's name on a grant application was not only unethical, it was illegal. That hiding financial assets from a beneficiary could be considered theft. That trust fund mismanagement had consequences, even if the thief shared your last name. It became my nightly ritual, headphones in, YouTube autoplay on, a legal pad filled with questions I answered myself one by one. I wrote things like, statute of limitations for forged documents, and can a minor file a report for financial exploitation? I downloaded PDFs from court websites and read them like bedtime stories. Each page made me feel less afraid. Less small. During the day, I watched them unravel, just a little. My mother snapped more often, mostly over small things, a misplaced receipt, a forgotten password. She hated not being worshipped. She hated that I stopped asking her for anything. My stepfather noticed it too. He once cornered me in the kitchen and asked, "What's with the attitude lately?" I looked him in the eye and said, "Just learning to take care of myself." His smirk faltered. My brother and I had returned to our Cold War truce. He hovered at the edge of my orbit now, unsure if he was complicit or a victim too. I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. But I watched how he reacted when I brought up family money. He always looked away, like guilt had weight. The real breakthrough came when I found the old external hard drive in the bottom drawer of my stepfather's desk. It was unlabeled, dusty, and tucked under manuals for printers we didn't own. I plugged it into my laptop and held my breath. What loaded was years' worth of documents, tax returns, email backups, scanned forms with digital signatures. And tucked inside a folder marked 2018, I found an email chain that made my blood run cold. It was between my mother and someone named R.S. Parsons, a financial advisor. The subject, reallocation of minor accounts. In it, she asked how to discreetly move funds from Jane's name into a joint custodial account for tax purposes. Parsons replied with caution, stating it would require signed consent and that the child must be informed at age of majority. She responded, "She's not the type to notice." That line hit me like a slap. Not the type to notice. They'd bet on my silence. On my stupidity. They didn't just neglect me, they built their wealth on the assumption that I'd never fight back. I saved every file. Created backups. Encrypted them. I sent copies to a dummy email account I'd created under a pseudonym, L.R. Stone. A name I thought sounded sharp, hard, untraceable. Every plan needs a ghost. That would be mine. Then came the question, what do I do with all of this? I needed validation. Not from them, but from someone who could confirm what I suspected wasn't just morally wrong, it was criminal. So I waited. I researched clinics and pro bono law centers. Found 1-3 bus rides away in a part of town my mother would never step foot in. I forged a permission slip for a school career event, slipped into jeans and a hoodie, and spent the afternoon sitting across from a paralegal named Grace who listened without flinching. I showed her some of the documents on a flash drive. I didn't say everything. Just enough to sketch the shape of the crime. Her eyes narrowed as she read. Who signed this? I swallowed. They said I did. But I didn't. She looked up at me. Her voice was careful. That's forgery. And if the money was moved without your knowledge, that's financial exploitation of a minor. Depending on how much, this could rise to felony level. I exhaled so sharply it felt like a collapse. She kept reading. And this email about reallocation. If you were the account holder, and they moved those funds, it's embezzlement. There it was. The word I hadn't dared think. Embezzlement. I stared at the ceiling, blinked hard, and let the gravity settle into my bones. She leaned in. You're not crazy. This is real. And it's serious. I nodded, slow and heavy. I felt a tear slip out, but I didn't wipe it. I wanted to remember how it felt to be believed. Do you want to pursue this now? She asked. There's a process. Not yet, I said. But I will. Grace slid me her card. Whenever you're ready. On the bus ride home, I clutched that card like a weapon. My reflection in the window stared back at me, sharper now, eyes older, mouth set. No longer surviving. Strategizing. When I got home, no one even noticed I was late. My mother was arguing with someone on the phone, something about a chargeback. My stepfather was asleep on the couch, snoring through a commercial for luxury cruises. I walked past them both and went straight to my room. I opened my laptop and renamed my folder. Phase 1, Education, complete. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be about forgiveness or even justice. This was going to be about precision. Because now I had proof, timing, leverage, and someone on the outside who'd confirmed what I knew in my gut from the start. They didn't just abandon me. They built a life on my name. And I was going to burn every piece of it down. I didn't rush after that. That was the second thing they never understood about me. They thought revenge came from tantrums, slammed doors, raised voices. They didn't realize the most dangerous people are the ones who wait. I waited. I built the trap so slowly that even I sometimes forgot it was there. I started with silence. No accusations. No questions. I became pleasant again, helpful even. I folded laundry. I washed dishes. I asked my mother about Europe like I was genuinely interested. She basked in it, mistaking compliance for forgiveness. Narcissistic families always do. They relax when you stop resisting. That's when they're most vulnerable. Behind the scenes, I moved everything into place. I contacted Grace again from a public library computer and asked about anonymous reporting. She explained the difference between a tip and a formal complaint, how an audit could be triggered quietly through the right channels. I learned which agencies didn't alert the subject immediately. I learned how long financial reviews typically took. I learned how to disappear from the paper trail while still pushing it forward. Strategy over spectacle. Always. I filed my first report under the alias. Not emotional. Not detailed. Just enough. Possible mismanagement of custodial accounts. I attached no documents. Just names, dates, institutions. I knew what would happen next. A flag. A note. A file opened somewhere I'd never see. That was enough for now. Next came the banks. I didn't call them directly, that would have alerted my mother. Instead, I requested account histories through online portals using information I'd memorized from the hard drive. I knew the passwords. I knew the security questions. Her favorite teacher. Her first pet. Her maiden name. She reused everything. People who think they're smarter than everyone else rarely bother to protect themselves. Statements arrived by email, then by mail. I intercepted the envelopes before she could. I photographed everything. Every transfer. Every withdrawal. Every time my name was used like a shell company to move money somewhere else. Financial manipulation has a rhythm once you know how to listen. And I was listening closely. The tension lived in my body like a second heartbeat. Every time the phone rang, my shoulders tightened. Every unfamiliar car on our street made my stomach flip. I slept lightly, half awake, afraid I'd miss something important. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about reclaiming my life from people who'd decided it was expendable. One afternoon, my brother slipped me a note. Just 4 words, they're asking questions. My pulse spiked. I found him later in the garage, pretending to look for a wrench. Who? I asked. Mom. Stepdad. They're stressed. Something about an email from the bank. I nodded once. Calm. Controlled. Did they say what? He shook his head. Just, audits. Reviews. Stuff like that. Audits. The word settled into me like a quiet victory. The trap was closing, inch by inch. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I just thanked him and walked away. Allies don't need reassurance. They need stability. At dinner that night, my mother barely touched her food. She kept checking her phone, jaw tight, eyes darting. My stepfather tried to lighten the mood, joked about paperwork nonsense. I watched them carefully, cataloging every tell. My mother's fingers trembled when she lifted her glass. Her foot bounced under the table. She laughed too loudly at nothing. Guilt always leaks out eventually. Later, I overheard them arguing in the bedroom. This isn't normal, she hissed. They don't just audit for no reason. You're overreacting, he snapped. It's probably random. Nothing is random, she said. Not with money. I leaned against the wall, heart pounding, and let their fear wash over me. This was the first real crack. Not confrontation. Not exposure. Fear. That was the beginning of the end. I balanced everything carefully. I didn't push too hard. I spaced out my reports. I waited between actions. The goal wasn't to destroy them overnight, it was to make them unravel slowly, to let the weight of their own lies crush them. Psychological warfare is about timing. About letting the enemy exhaust themselves before you ever strike openly. Grace connected me with someone else at the clinic, a forensic accountant who volunteered his time for complex cases. We met once, briefly. I showed him anonymized copies of the documents. He didn't hesitate. "This is systematic," he said. "They didn't make a mistake. They built a system to siphon funds. And they used a minor's identity to do it. Can it be proven?" I asked. He nodded. "Easily. If the audit goes far enough." "Will it?" I pressed. He smiled thinly. "It already has." I walked home that day feeling lighter than I had in years. Not happy. Focused. Like a chess player who sees the endgame several moves ahead. They still thought they were in control. They still thought I was the quiet one. They didn't know that every move they made now was being recorded, analyzed, prepared for use. The first official letter arrived 2 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic. No sirens. No knocks on the door. Just a white envelope mixed in with the junk mail, addressed to my stepfather. I saw it before he did. My hand shook as I read the return address. County Court Financial Review Division. I placed it carefully back on the counter and walked away. I heard the shout from the kitchen minutes later. "What the hell is this?" he yelled. My mother rushed in. "What?" "They're requesting documents. Statements. Records. They're opening a review." Her face drained of color. She looked small suddenly. Older. Afraid. "Did you do something?" she asked him. He stared at the letter, then at her. "Did you?" I sat on my bed upstairs, door closed, listening to their voices rise and fall like a storm finally breaking. Accusations. Panic. Denial. Everything they'd avoided for years, crashing down all at once. Then there was a knock on my door. Soft. Careful. I didn't answer. A few seconds passed. "Jane," my mother said, voice tight. "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" I closed my eyes and smiled for the first time in months. Because the trap wasn't just set. It had sprung. And they had no idea how deep it went. It started in the courthouse lobby, polished marble floors, whispering voices, the sound of heels clacking with too much purpose. My mother sat beside my stepfather, sunglasses still on indoors, as if shielding herself from the very thing she'd spent years pretending didn't exist. My brother was there too, pacing, chewing a hangnail until it bled. I sat across from them, spine straight, hands folded, a notebook in my lap. I didn't speak. Not yet. Let the silence speak for me. Let the weight twist in their stomachs. They still didn't know. They'd received the summons 2 weeks ago. A formal request for financial disclosure tied to a complaint of custodial mismanagement and unauthorized asset transfer. They assumed it was a mistake, or maybe someone else's issue. My mother blamed the banks. My stepfather blamed the broken system. They hadn't even considered the possibility that it came from within their own house. From me. The waiting room door opened. "Linda Anderson," a clerk called. My mother stood, composed but trembling. She tugged at her designer blazer like it could hold her together. My stepfather followed, muttering something about hiring a better accountant. My brother didn't move. He just looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. His eyes were bloodshot, uncertain. "You knew this was coming," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I just closed my notebook and stood up. Inside the hearing room, the temperature dropped. Or maybe that was just me. I didn't bring a lawyer. I didn't need one, not today. Today was about exposure, not execution. The auditors would handle the rest. The attorneys would come later. A representative from the state sat behind a desk with a thick file. The file I'd built. Document by document. Email by email. Transfer by forged signature. They asked polite, procedural questions first, verifying names, confirming identities. Then came the financials. One by one, line by line, the story unfolded. According to this record, $12,000 was withdrawn from a custodial grant assigned to the minor, Jane Anderson. Can you explain that transaction? My mother blinked rapidly. That's a misunderstanding. We were managing the account for her benefit. Without her knowledge? We're her parents, she snapped. The representative didn't flinch. That does not supersede federal and state consent laws. Were you aware that forging a minor's signature on financial documents is a felony? Her face went pale, the blood draining beneath the powdered foundation. My stepfather shifted beside her. There was no forgery, he said too quickly. I have handwriting samples on file, the rep replied. There is a clear mismatch between the signed grant application and Jane Anderson's verified signature. The silence that followed was almost kind. Almost. Then the man looked at me. Ms. Anderson, would you like to add anything to this statement? I felt my mother's stare before I turned to face her. Rage. Confusion. Panic. A desperate attempt to calculate whether I'd been coached, coerced, manipulated by someone else. But I wasn't someone else's puppet. I was the architect. Yes, I said calmly. I'd like to confirm that I never signed those documents. I had no knowledge of the grant or the funds until I began reviewing financial records found in my legal guardian's possession. My mother's breath caught like a hiccup she couldn't swallow. Are you implying we stole from you? She hissed. I'm not implying anything, I said. I brought receipts. I opened my bag and placed the folder on the table. Inside, copies of every forged document, every falsified application, the email exchange between her and R.S. Parsons, and the notarized statement from Grace's firm confirming the timeline. I didn't slam it down. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The document screamed for me. The representative flipped through the folder. Her pen paused at the grant summary. This matches the withdrawal timeline exactly. Did you receive any of these funds, Ms. Anderson? No. Were you informed of your rights as a custodial account holder upon turning 14? No. My mother stood up suddenly, palms flat against the table. This is insane. She's manipulating you. She's confused. But her voice cracked on the last word. She knew the truth had landed. I was hungry, I said. Cold. Alone. While you were in Europe using money that was supposed to be for me. You left me with $2 and utilities that were already overdue. I documented every bill, every skipped meal, every lie. The air in the room changed. Heavier. Realer. My stepfather leaned back like the chair was suddenly unfamiliar. You're doing this to destroy us, he said, bitter. Out of spite. No, I said, quieter now. I'm doing this so the story ends with the truth. Not your version of it. The representative cleared her throat. Given the material submitted, we are forwarding this case to the fraud division. A formal investigation will follow. You are advised to retain legal counsel. Panic bloomed on my mother's face, but she tried to contain it. She reached across the table, touching the folder like it might rewrite itself if she held it long enough. Jane, she said, voice shaking. We can fix this. We're family. The irony made my hands go still. You didn't think of that when you forged my name, I said. Her mouth opened but nothing came out. Not a denial. Not an apology. Just silence. And finally, it wasn't mine. The hearing ended with formalities and thin plastic smiles. The rep thanked us for our cooperation. I stood and gathered my folder. My mother was still sitting, fingers pressed to her temples like the pressure might stop what was already in motion. My stepfather stared at the table, blinking too often. My brother looked away. Outside, I stepped into the cold light of afternoon, my shadow stretching long across the sidewalk. I felt weightless, not because the war was over, but because the first public shot had been fired, and I'd been the one to pull the trigger. I made it halfway down the courthouse steps before I heard her voice behind me. Jane. I turned. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She wasn't angry either. What I saw on her face was worse. Recognition. You did this, she whispered. I didn't blink. You orchestrated all of this. I smiled, small and sharp. I learned from the best. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the absence of yelling, or the lack of slammed doors, this was deeper. A bone-quiet kind of silence, the kind that comes after a storm that doesn't just pass, but leaves nothing standing. The kind of silence that smells like scorched earth. They stopped speaking to each other the week the second court notice arrived. Not because they were united against me, but because they were too busy blaming each other for the fallout. My mother claimed my stepfather should have covered the audit trail better. He blamed her for being too flashy, for taking too many liberties with my name, my accounts, my life. I listened from behind my bedroom door, sipping tea like a witness at a war crimes tribunal. By the time the investigation extended to frozen accounts and the recommendation of formal charges, our house had turned into a mausoleum. Curtains always drawn. Answering machine perpetually full. My mother avoided neighbors like the plague, sunglasses fixed to her face even in overcast weather. Her kingdom, carefully curated PTA alliances, yoga class friendships, Facebook photos with passive-aggressive captions, crumbled quietly, cruelly. One parent asked why her daughter wasn't invited to any more playdates. Another posted a vague status about some people stealing from their own. The humiliation she once used like a weapon came back to slice her from the inside out. They sold the car first. Then the condo I wasn't supposed to know existed. Then the piano that nobody ever played. It wasn't fast. It wasn't loud. It was desperate and slow, like watching a great structure collapse floor by floor. They tried to shield my brother from it at first, but he was older now, old enough to connect the dots. I caught him staring at me sometimes, not with anger, but with the kind of respect that's born from witnessing someone do what nobody else could. He never said thank you. He didn't have to. We understood each other now in ways that only come from surviving the same fire. I stayed quiet through it all. No gloating. No revenge monologues. That would have made this about emotion. And this, what I'd done, wasn't emotional. It was surgical. It was long overdue. I watched as the social worker called them cooperative but disorganized. As the auditor read their inconsistencies like a prosecutor without needing a courtroom. As the bank manager confirmed that funds were misused, reallocated, and withdrawn in ways that directly violated custodial trust law. I watched, silently, as truth did its job better than I ever could with words alone. The woman who once told me I was too dramatic to be taken seriously was now whispering into her lawyer's ear, red-eyed and hunched like she'd aged a decade in weeks. The man who used to sneer at my attitude problem now avoided my gaze completely, as if I were a ghost with too much memory. And me? I kept going. I started saving. Not for revenge. For real life. I got a job at the library after school, logged hours in silence between the stacks, helped shelve books for minimum wage and maximum clarity. Every paycheck felt like another step out of the pit they'd built and shoved me into. I applied for grants under my real name. Wrote my real story. Submitted documents with my real signature, firm, sharp, no longer forged. One day in the mail, I received a letter. Plain envelope. Official seal. Restitution approved. They were ordered to repay a portion of what was stolen. It wasn't everything. It never would be. But it was a start. A symbol. A legal confirmation that I wasn't crazy. That I was right. That survival, when refined enough, becomes strategy, and that strategy, when sharpened by betrayal, becomes power. I left the letter on the kitchen counter. My mother found it before breakfast. She didn't say a word. Just stared at it, face drained of color, and walked out of the room. I heard the front door close behind her like a slow confession. My stepfather didn't even ask what it was. He just sat down, picked up his coffee mug, and stared into it like it held a different life. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. That night, I walked past the hallway drawer. The one that used to hum with secrets, locked for years like it was sacred. It was empty now. Just a hollow space where deception used to live. I opened it one last time, ran my fingers along the edges, then shut it gently. Let it rest. There are no medals for surviving a toxic family. No standing ovations when you prove emotional abuse leaves paper trails. But I didn't need applause. I had peace. And in the end, peace feels a lot like power. Quiet. Clean. Absolute. I packed my bag that night, one duffel, no fanfare. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. They'd taught me to survive by accident. And I'd taught myself how to win on purpose. As I stepped outside into the early morning light, I took one last look at the house. It didn't haunt me anymore. It just stood there, ordinary and unremarkable, like the past always does when it no longer controls you. I had no idea where I'd end up. But I knew this, I would never be forgotten again. Not by them. Not by myself. And not by a world that now had a paper trail with my name on it, spelled correctly, signed by me. They thought leaving me behind would break me. They were wrong. It built me. Their collapse didn't come with shouting matches or police sirens, just silence. Court orders arrived. Accounts froze. Phone calls went unanswered. Friends stopped responding. The world they had built on borrowed names and forged papers began to rot from the inside, and all I had to do was watch it fall. The girl they once abandoned with $2 and no warmth had returned, not for forgiveness, but for truth. And truth, when documented properly, doesn't need permission to destroy. I never got an apology, but I stopped needing one. That was the true closure. They couldn't rewrite the past, because I owned the records now, the files, the evidence, the paper trail carved by their own hands. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I dismantled them with the very systems they used to erase me. In the end, I walked away quietly. No vengeance speech. No fireworks. Just freedom. I didn't carry the trauma. I archived it, studied it, and turned it into design. Because this is what neglect does, it creates the kind of child who notices everything, and then grows into the kind of adult who never forgets. They left me with $2 and no protection, but I grew up and took back everything they thought I'd never notice.